Daniel Carter only meant to drop off a laptop charger, a project folder, and a security badge. 5 minutes. Knock handed over leave. But when the door swung open, Olivia Bennett stood there in a thin white shirt, bare feet on the hardwood hair, loose and undone, no trace of the woman who commanded boardrooms without blinking. She looked at him, and something unlocked behind her eyes, not surprise, not embarrassment, but something closer to relief. In that doorway, he did not see his boss. He saw someone he was never supposed to meet, and he had no idea whether to step inside. It started the way most things start at a design firm in Charlotte, with an email nobody expected. Olivia Bennett, creative director, the woman who had not missed a single day of work in 2 years, sent a 3-line message to HR on a Tuesday morning, requesting personal leave effective immediately. No explanation, no timeline, just a polite, clipped note that read like she had written it with her jaw clenched. By 10 o'clock, the entire 7th floor was whispering about it. By noon, the project leads were scrambling to redistribute her meetings. And by the end of the day, Daniel Carter was standing in front of the office manager's desk, holding a plastic bag with Olivia's forgotten belongings and an address scribbled on a sticky note. He did not volunteer for the errand. His manager, Rick Adler, had dropped the bag on his desk with a shrug and said someone had to run it over. Daniel was the senior project coordinator on Olivia's primary account, which apparently made him the most logical choice. He did not argue. He took the bag, checked the address, and left the building without thinking much about it. That was who Daniel was, the man who handled things quietly, without complaint, without making it anyone else's problem. It was the same quality that had made him reliable at work, and according to his ex-wife, impossible to live with. He had been divorced for 3 years. The marriage lasted 4. It ended not with shouting or betrayal, but with a slow, suffocating silence that neither of them knew how to break. His ex-wife once told him during one of their last real conversations that loving him felt like trying to hold a conversation with a locked door. He had nodded because he understood exactly what she meant, and that understanding changed nothing. After the papers were signed, he moved into a 1-bedroom apartment near Noda, threw himself into work, and built a life that was functional, quiet, and completely hollow. He was 34 years old, and he had stopped expecting anything from anyone, including himself. Olivia Bennett was the opposite of everything Daniel had become. At 29, she was the youngest creative director the firm had ever appointed, and she carried that title like armor. In meetings, her voice never wavered. Her feedback was precise sometimes, cutting always correct. She dressed in tailored blazers and structured dresses that made her look like she had been engineered for boardrooms. Nobody at the company called her by her first name to her face. Nobody asked her personal questions. There was a running joke on the 7th floor that Olivia Bennett did not have a life outside the office, that she simply powered down at 6 o'clock and recharged overnight like the rest of the equipment. Daniel had worked under her for almost a year, and in that time, she had never once spoken to him about anything that was not on a project brief. So when he pulled into her driveway that Tuesday evening and saw the house, a modest craftsman bungalow with a porch light on and curtains half drawn, it did not match. The Olivia he knew belonged in a glass high-rise or a sleek downtown loft, not a house with chipped paint on the mailbox and a garden hose coiled by the front steps. He grabbed the bag, walked up the porch, and knocked twice. The plan was simple. Hand off the charger, the project folder, and the security badge. Say something professional. Leave. The door opened, and the plan disintegrated. She stood in the doorway in that thin white shirt, the same one from the moment he would replay in his head for weeks afterward. No blazer. No heels. No armor. Her feet were bare on the wooden floor. Her hair fell past her shoulders without the usual sharp part, and her face, stripped of makeup, stripped of composure, looked younger than he had ever seen it. Her eyes found his, and there was a flicker of something raw, something she tried to swallow before he could catch it. She almost managed. "Daniel." She said his name like she was confirming something to herself, not a greeting, a fact she was processing. He held up the bag. "Rick asked me to bring these over. Your charger, the Whitfield folder, and your badge." He kept his voice even the way he always did. Professional. Contained. He extended the bag toward her and waited for her to take it, so he could turn around, walk back to his car, and forget the way she looked standing there without her defenses. Olivia took the bag with one hand and set it on the console table behind her without looking at it. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, her fingers resting on the doorframe, her eyes not quite meeting his, but not turning away either. The house behind her was dim and silent. No television, no music, nothing. It had the heavy quiet of a place where someone had been sitting alone in the dark for a long time and had only turned on the light because the doorbell rang. Daniel shifted his weight. "Well, hope everything is all right. We will hold things down at the office until you are. Do you want to come in for a few minutes?" Her voice was steady but thin like a wire pulled taut. She looked at him directly now, and he saw it clearly. Not the creative director, not the woman who made junior designers cry in review sessions, but someone standing on the edge of something she did not want to name, asking a near stranger for 5 more minutes of not being alone. Every rational part of Daniel's brain told him to decline. She was his boss. This was her home. Whatever she was going through was none of his business, and crossing that threshold would blur a line that existed for good reason. He knew all of this. He understood professional boundaries, the way he understood project timelines, clearly, logically, without ambiguity. He stepped inside. The living room was clean but unsettled. A blanket bunched on one end of the couch, a mug of cold tea on the coffee table untouched, a stack of books on the floor beside the armchair spines, uncracked like she had pulled them off the shelf, looking for something to do, and then abandoned the idea. The house smelled like lavender candle wax and stale air. It was the home of someone who had been functioning on autopilot and had finally stopped moving. Olivia closed the door behind him and walked to the kitchen. She poured 2 glasses of water, without asking if he wanted one, and brought them back to the living room. She sat on one end of the couch. He sat on the other. For a while, neither of them spoke. It should have been awkward. It was not. Then Olivia set her glass down and said, without looking at him, "I have been running that department for 2 years, and I have not taken a single day off. Not one. And when I finally did, I did not know what to do with myself. I have been sitting in this house for 36 hours, and I have done nothing. I have not read. I have not cooked. I just sat here." Her voice was flat factual, like she was delivering a status report on someone else's life, but her hands folded in her lap were gripping each other so tightly, her knuckles had gone white. Daniel recognized the tone. He had used it himself sitting across from a divorce attorney, listing the reasons his marriage had failed, like he was reading items off a spreadsheet. It was the voice people used when the truth was too big to say with any feeling, so they stripped the feeling out and hoped the words alone would be enough. He did not offer advice. He did not tell her it would be fine. He said, "I know what that feels like. Sitting still and realizing you have no idea who you are when you stop working." Olivia looked at him, then really looked at him, and something in her expression shifted. Not gratitude, not vulnerability, recognition. The look of someone who had been speaking a language no one else understood, and had just heard it spoken back to them. They talked for 2 hours, not about the Whitfield account or quarterly reviews or the new client pitch. They talked about the weight of being competent all the time, about the loneliness of being the person everyone relied on, but no one checked on. Olivia told him she had not cried in over a year, not because she had nothing to cry about, but because she had forgotten how to let herself. Daniel told her he understood, because he had spent 3 years after his divorce pretending he was fine, until the pretending became the only thing he knew how to do. When he finally stood to leave, it was dark outside. He walked to the door, and she followed him. On the porch, under the yellow glow of that single light, she said, "Thank you for not making this weird." Daniel looked at her. "It isn't weird." She almost smiled. Almost. "It will be on Monday." He nodded because she was right. On Monday, she would be the creative director again, and he would be the coordinator who filed reports and managed timelines. And none of this would make sense inside the fluorescent walls of the 7th floor. But that was Monday. And right now, standing on her porch, with the Carolina night settling around them, the line between boss and employee had already blurred past the point of pretending it had not. He drove home with the windows down and the radio off. He did not think about work. He did not think about his ex-wife. He thought about the way Olivia Bennett had looked at him when he said he understood, like he had handed her something she did not know she needed. He had gone there to deliver a bag of forgotten things. He left carrying something he could not put down. The following Monday, 6 days after she had filed that abrupt leave request, Olivia returned to the office like nothing had happened. She walked through the 7th floor at 8:15 in a charcoal blazer, her hair pulled back tight, her heels clicking on the tile, with the same measured rhythm the whole department had learned to recognize. She did not look at Daniel when she passed his desk. She did not look at anyone longer than necessary. By 9 o'clock, she was leading the weekly review, her voice sharp and clean, dismantling a junior designer's layout with the kind of surgical precision that made people sit up straighter in their chairs. It was a flawless performance. Daniel watched it from across the conference table and recognized it for exactly what it was: the same wall he had spent his entire marriage hiding behind, rebuilt overnight and reinforced with professional concrete. For the first 2 weeks, nothing changed at work. They exchanged emails about deadlines. She approved his status reports without comment. In meetings, she addressed him the same way she addressed everyone else by last name, with the tone of someone reading from a checklist. If anyone on the 7th floor had suspected that Daniel Carter had sat in Olivia Bennett's living room until dark, drinking water and talking about loneliness, there was no evidence of it in the fluorescent light of the office. The distance was back, and it was built to hold. But the distance had a fault line in it now, and they both knew it. It started with small things. A text from Olivia on a Wednesday night. Not about work, but about a documentary she had watched, something about architecture in post-war Berlin. He replied. She replied again. The conversation lasted 40 minutes and ended with her sending a photo of her cold tea from the coffee table, the same mug he had seen on his first visit, with the caption, "Still have not learned to drink it while it is hot." It was such a small human thing. It should not have mattered, but it did, because it meant she was still letting him see behind the curtain, even from a distance. The following Saturday, she texted him again. The kitchen faucet was leaking, and she could not figure out how to shut off the valve under the sink. Daniel drove over. He fixed the faucet in 15 minutes. She made coffee, actual hot coffee this time, and they sat on her porch, while the afternoon light stretched across the yard. She told him about the pressure of running the creative department at 29, how every decision she made was scrutinized twice as hard because of her age, how she had learned early that showing any uncertainty would be treated as incompetence. She had built a version of herself that could survive boardrooms and budget meetings and client dinners, and that version worked. But it was not her. It was a role she stepped into every morning and stripped off every night, and somewhere along the way she had stopped being able to tell where the role ended and she began. Daniel listened the way he always did, without interrupting, without offering solutions. He understood the architecture of that kind of isolation because he had built his own version of it. His was quieter, less visible, but it was the same structure, a life constructed around the principle that if you never let anyone close enough to disappoint you, you would never have to feel the weight of that disappointment. It had worked for 3 years. It had also hollowed him out so completely that some mornings he could not remember why he got dressed. He came back the next weekend to help her fix a shelf in the hallway that had pulled away from the wall. And again the week after that, when she mentioned the back gate was sticking. The repairs were never urgent. They both understood that the repairs were not the reason he kept coming back. But having a reason, something concrete, something with a task attached to it, made it easier to pretend the line still existed. He was helping a colleague. She was accepting help. That was all. At the office, the distance held, but the quality of the distance had changed. When Olivia addressed him in meetings, now there was a softness at the edge of her voice that had not been there before. Not obvious, not performative, just a slight loosening of the grip she kept on every word. And Daniel, who had spent a year avoiding eye contact with her because she intimidated him, now found himself looking at her across the conference room with a steadiness that felt dangerous. It was not attraction, not yet. Or at least, not only that. It was the strange, disorienting gravity of knowing someone's real face when the rest of the world only saw the mask. Then, one evening in late October, sitting on her couch, after he had tightened a loose hinge on her back door, Olivia asked the question that broke the last pretense between them. She was holding her coffee mug in both hands, her legs tucked beneath her, the house quiet around them in the way he had come to associate with her. A silence that was not peaceful, but practice the kind you learn to endure when you had no one to fill it with. "Do you ever get tired of pretending you are fine?" she asked. She was not looking at him. She was looking at the dark window across the room, where the reflection of the lamp made a small, warm circle against the glass. "Because I am so tired of it, Daniel. I am so tired of walking into that building every morning and performing for people who do not actually care whether I am okay as long as the work gets done." Daniel set his own mug down on the coffee table. He leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and looked at the floor for a long time before answering. Not because he did not know what to say, but because what he wanted to say was something he had never said out loud before. "My marriage did not end because we stopped loving each other," he said. "It ended because I could not figure out how to show her what I was feeling. I would come home every night, and she would ask how I was, and I would say fine, and she would look at me like she was watching me disappear. And I knew I was doing it. I just did not know how to stop." He turned his head and looked at Olivia. "So yes, I know what it feels like to perform." Olivia's grip tightened around her mug. Her jaw worked slightly the way it did in meetings when she was composing something precise, except this time she was not editing a brief. She was deciding how much of herself to hand over. "I have everything people are supposed to want," she said, her voice low and flat. "The title, the salary, the corner office, and I go home every night to this house, and I sit in this room, and I do not know who I am outside of that building. Nobody does. Nobody has ever seen me the way you have seen me in the last few weeks, and that terrifies me more than anything I have ever dealt with at work." That was the moment the ground shifted, not because of what she said, but because of what happened in the space between them after she said it. Something that had been building for weeks, carefully, cautiously through text messages and porch conversations and Saturday afternoon repairs locked into place. This was no longer sympathy. It was not a senior coordinator feeling sorry for his overworked boss. It was two people standing in the wreckage of their own carefully constructed lives, recognizing each other. The problem was that recognition did not exist in a vacuum. It existed inside a company with an HR department, a reporting structure, and a 7th floor full of people who noticed things. It was Rachel Dunn from accounts who said it first. She caught Daniel in the break room on a Thursday and mentioned with the casual precision of someone who had been waiting for the right moment that he seemed different lately. Lighter. Less like a man who had been sleepwalking through his own life. Daniel shrugged it off. But then Marcus Grant, one of the senior designers, made a comment during a team lunch about how Olivia had been oddly human in the last review cycle, and someone else joked that maybe she had finally gotten a life outside the office. The laughter around the table was harmless, but Daniel felt it land in his chest like a stone. 2 days later, Olivia called him into her office and closed the door. She stood behind her desk, with her arms crossed, jaw set, shoulders squared, every trace of the woman on the couch erased. "People are starting to talk," she said. "I do not know what they think they know, but it does not matter. Perception is reality in this building." She looked at him with an expression that was trying very hard to be professional and was failing at the edges. "I think we need to create some distance." Daniel stood in front of her desk and felt the familiar architecture of retreat closing around him, the same architecture he had lived inside his entire adult life. The smart move was to agree. The safe move was to nod, walk out, and let whatever had grown between them die quietly in the gap between Saturday evenings and Monday mornings. He knew the playbook. He had run it before. "Is that what you want?" he asked. Not a challenge, a real question. Olivia's expression fractured for just a second, a hairline fissure that anyone else would have missed. Then her composure settled back into place. "It does not matter what I want. It matters what is appropriate." He left her office without arguing. She was right in the way that people who are terrified of losing control are always right, technically, strategically, defensively right. But he had seen that fracture, and he knew that what she was calling professionalism was actually fear. For the next 3 weeks they did not text. He did not go to her house. At work, they were exactly what they were supposed to be, director and coordinator, separated by title and function, orbiting each other at a sterile distance. The 7th floor settled back into its routines. Rachel Dunn stopped making comments in the break room. The whispers faded, and Daniel felt himself disappearing again. Then, in mid-November, Rick Adler pulled him into a conference room and told him about an opening in the operations division on the 4th floor. Same level, same pay, different chain of command. Rick framed it as a growth opportunity, a chance to broaden his skill set, work with a new team, expand his portfolio. But Daniel understood immediately what it actually was. Someone somewhere had decided that the optics of his proximity to Olivia needed to be managed, and this was the cleanest solution. He asked for a week to think about it. That night, he sat in his apartment in Noda and stared at the ceiling and understood with perfect clarity what was happening. If he took the transfer, he would no longer report to Olivia. The professional barrier would dissolve. Whatever existed between them could exist openly, without risking her reputation or his position. But if he stayed, if he refused the move, then whatever this was had to end. Completely. Permanently. Because staying meant choosing comfort over honesty, and comfort had already cost him a marriage. He went to her house on a Saturday afternoon. She opened the door, and the look on her face told him she already knew why he was there. They stood in her living room, neither sitting down the distance between them, charged with everything they had spent 3 weeks not saying. "Rick told me about the transfer," she said. Daniel nodded. Olivia crossed her arms, the same posture from her office, the same defensive geometry. But her voice when she spoke did not match it. "I do not want you to give up your position because of me. You have worked hard to get where you are. You should not have to rearrange your career because of this situation." Daniel looked at her. He could see it in the way her fingers dug into her own arms, in the tightness around her eyes, in the barely perceptible tremor at the corner of her mouth. She was trying so hard to do the right thing. She was trying so hard to push him away before she had to face what it would mean to let him stay. "Olivia," he said. Just her name. Not her title. Not her last name. Not the careful professional shorthand of the 7th floor. Just her. "This is not your decision to make for me." She looked at him, and for the first time since that Tuesday night when he had stood on her porch, he saw the full weight of everything she had been carrying. Not the pressure of the job, not the isolation of leadership, but the specific, brutal terror of wanting something she had convinced herself she did not deserve someone who saw her, all of her, and chose to stay anyway. "I'm afraid," she said, and the words came out quiet and raw, like they had been locked behind her ribs for years. "I am afraid that if you do this, and it does not work, you will have given up something real for something that was never going to last." Daniel stood there in her living room, in the house that did not match the woman the world thought she was, and felt something he had not felt since before his divorce. Not certainty he was too old and too honest for certainty, but clarity, the clean, sharp understanding that comfort and courage were not the same thing, and that he had spent too many years choosing one while pretending it was the other. He did not answer her that night. He drove home, and for the first time in years, the silence in his car did not feel like emptiness. It felt like the space before a decision that would change everything. On Monday morning, Daniel walked into Rick Adler's office before the first meeting of the day and told him he would take the transfer. Rick looked relieved the way managers always look when a potential problem resolves itself without paperwork. He shook Daniel's hand, told him the operations team on the 4th floor would be lucky to have him, and said the transition would take about 2 weeks. Daniel nodded, signed the internal request form, and went back to his desk on the 7th floor to finish out his remaining days in a department that had been his professional home for nearly a year. He did not tell Olivia. Not that morning, not that afternoon, not in the days that followed. He wanted the decision to stand on its own, clean and untangled from the weight of her reaction. This was not a sacrifice. It was not a concession. It was the first honest thing he had done in years, choosing something that scared him instead of choosing the thing that was familiar. His entire adult life had been built on the principle of damage control, of minimizing exposure, of never wanting anything badly enough to risk losing it. That principle had kept him intact after his divorce. It had also kept him numb, and he was finished being numb. The news reached Olivia through HR on a Wednesday. Daniel knew the exact moment she found out, because he was walking past the glass wall of her office and saw her sitting perfectly still at her desk, staring at her computer screen, with an expression that was not anger and was not relief, but something more complicated than either the look of someone who had told herself a door was closed and had just heard it open. She did not call him in. She did not send an email. She did not look up as he passed. That silence lasted 4 days. On Sunday evening, his phone buzzed with a single text from her number. No words, just the address of a coffee shop in Plaza Midwood that he had never been to, followed by a time 10 the next morning. It was his first day on the 4th floor. She would have known that. He arrived at 9:50 and found her already sitting at a corner table with 2 black coffees, no sugar, no milk. She was wearing jeans and a gray sweater, her hair down. No earrings, no watch. It struck him, as it always did, when he saw her outside the office, how different she looked when she was not performing. Not smaller, just real. She pushed one of the coffees toward him as he sat down. For a moment, she just looked at him, studying his face like she was searching for evidence of regret or obligation, or any sign that he had done this for the wrong reasons. Daniel let her look. He had nothing to hide. "You did not have to do that," Olivia said. Her voice was quiet, controlled, but there was a roughness underneath it that she was not bothering to smooth away. "I told you not to." "You told me not to do it for you," Daniel said. "I did not do it for you." She blinked. Her expression opened just slightly, like a window letting in air for the first time. "Then why?" He wrapped his hands around the coffee cup and looked at her across the small table. This woman who had spent her entire career building walls so seamless that nobody even knew they were walls. Because I spent 3 years after my divorce choosing the comfortable option every single time. Comfortable apartment, comfortable routine, comfortable distance from everyone. And it worked. I was fine. I was also completely empty. He held her gaze. I am not doing that anymore. I am not choosing comfortable just because it is easier. And you are not easy, Olivia, but you are worth showing up for. She looked down at her coffee. Her fingers traced the rim of the cup in a slow circle, and he could see the war happening inside her, the part that wanted to believe him fighting the part that had been trained by years of self-reliance and professional armor to treat vulnerability as a liability. Olivia Bennett had built her life around the conviction that needing someone was the fastest way to lose everything she had earned. Every promotion, every accolade, every glass ceiling she had shattered had reinforced the same lesson. Depend on yourself, because no one else will carry the weight for you. And now, here was a man who was not asking her to give up the weight. He was asking her to let him stand next to her while she carried it. I do not know how to do this, she said finally. The words came out stripped of strategy, stripped of everything except the raw truth of someone who had never let another person this close and did not have a playbook for it. I have spent my whole life pushing people away before they can get close enough to see that I do not have it all figured out. And you already see it. You have seen it since that first night. And I keep waiting for you to decide it is too much, that I am too much, and walk away. Because that is what people do. Daniel shook his head slowly. I am not people. She looked at him, and the guarded expression she had worn like a second skin for as long as he had known her fell away. Not all at once. Not dramatically. It just loosened the way a fist unclenches when the person holding it finally decides they are too tired to keep fighting. They did not kiss in that coffee shop. They did not make promises or declarations. What they did was harder than any of that. They sat across from each other and agreed to begin. Not from the distance of boss and employee, not from the careful choreography of professional courtesy, but from the bare, uncertain, terrifying ground of two people who had spent years hiding from themselves and had finally decided to stop. The weeks that followed were not a love story from a movie. They were slower than that and messier. Daniel moved into his new role. On the 4th floor, learned new systems, met new colleagues, adapted to a different rhythm. Olivia continued running the creative department with the same sharp precision, but the people closest to her noticed something they could not quite name, a loosening of breath where there used to be rigidity. She started leaving the office before 7. She stopped answering emails at midnight. Small changes invisible to most, but seismic to those who knew what to look for. They saw each other outside of work, dinners, at her kitchen table, walks through the neighborhood in the early dark of November evenings, long conversations that started about nothing and ended up somewhere neither of them expected. Olivia learned slowly and imperfectly that letting someone in did not mean letting go of who she was. Daniel learned something he had failed to learn in an entire marriage, that saying what you feel is not a weakness, and that silence, no matter how comfortable it seems, will eventually become the only sound in an empty room. It was not perfect. She still retreated, sometimes pulled the armor back on when the closeness felt like too much. He still went quiet in moments when he should have spoken. But the difference now was that they came back. Every time one of them withdrew, the other waited. Not with frustration, not with ultimatums, but with the steady, patient understanding that trust is not built in grand gestures. It is built in the small, repeated act of showing up when it would be easier to walk away. On a Saturday morning in early December, Daniel drove to the craftsman bungalow on the street with the chipped mailbox. The air was cold and sharp, the kind of Carolina winter morning that smells like wood smoke and damp leaves. He walked up the porch steps and knocked the same way he had knocked months ago with a plastic bag of forgotten office supplies, and no idea what he was walking into. Olivia opened the door. She was wearing a white shirt, not the same one, but close enough to make them both feel the echo of that first evening. Her hair was down her feet bare on the hardwood, and she looked at him with an expression he had never seen on her face before. Not the guarded neutrality of the office, not the exhausted honesty of those early conversations. Something entirely new. Something that looked like the beginning of a life she had stopped believing she was allowed to have. She smiled. Not almost. Not halfway. A real, full, undefended smile that reached her eyes and stayed there. "Come in," she said. Daniel stepped through the door. Not as the man who had been sent to deliver her things. Not as the coordinator who had filed her reports and managed her timelines. Not as someone who needed a reason, an errand, an excuse to be there. He was there because she wanted him there. And for the first time in longer than either of them could remember, that was enough. Sometimes the thing that breaks you open is not a disaster. It is not a betrayal or a crisis or a dramatic collapse. Sometimes it is just a door opening at the wrong moment, revealing someone you were never supposed to see unguarded, imperfect human. And sometimes the bravest thing you will ever do is not walking away from that moment. It is walking toward it, knowing that the person on the other side is just as terrified as you are, and choosing to stay anyway. Because success does not replace connection. Titles do not keep you warm, and if you want to be loved for who you really are, you have to let someone see you first.